And it says we're live. It says that Facebook.
Of course, all the people I invited to the event earlier and shared it with aren't going to see this.
Oh no, that's right. Well, we can make a post.
Maybe put it in the comments.
I can't believe this. We have a big time star on here and we're screwing up.
Hardly.
You want to tag everyone, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm doing @followers.
Cool. Oh, we got 2 people in. 3. So I apologize for the delay and the technical difficulties we're having tonight. But definitely did up okay on Facebook this time, so that's good. Oh, Kara says hello. Hey, Kara.
Do we have the link for that?
For the event?
Yeah, I got it here.
Kristen, have you ever watched one of our lives?
I've popped in and out. It pops up on my Facebook here and there.
Yeah, usually we have like, I don't know, 20, 30 people in here anyway.
And I've listened to some of the episodes before as well.
Okay. Got it posted. At least we've got Facebook back up and running. We did lose a couple people in the process, but those things happen.
All right. So
okay.
I guess let's go ahead and start. So tonight we're joined by Kristen Seavey. She is the host of Murder, She Told podcast. And she's also an advocate for the case of the missing person of Reeves Johnson, missing from Kittery, Maine, February 1983. What's the actual... Oh, welcome, Kristen. Thank you for
Hi. No worries. Thanks for having me.
Do we know the exact day he actually disappeared? Because I know his last day of work was February 3rd, but do they know when exactly he disappeared?
Well, that's the day that we actually consider to be his date of disappearance because it's the last day that people who actually knew him saw him. So that's when he was last reliably seen. So we say that he disappeared on February 3rd because anything after that it's not really confirmed for us.
Okay. And if you could, tell us what you know about Reeves and who he was growing up and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So Reeves was actually born in Philadelphia. Him and his family grew up there. His older sister is Sally. He has a younger brother named Hugh. He shares the same name as his dad. He's just the third, and his dad, who went by Kemp, is the second. That photo is of him when he was a teenager. So Reeves was, he had a very wicked, dry sense of humor. His brother Hugh said that he had these like little quiet zingers. So if you're paying attention, you're going to hear the little witty remarks that he says. He was very stubborn. He was a deep thinker. His dad really cultivated a lot of thinking at the dinner table, especially. So they would get into debates and you would have to explain why you felt a certain way. And it couldn't just end with like, well, that's how I feel. You had to go deeper than that. So I think that
that's
really
awesome.
Yeah, I think it really cultivated a sense of like philosophical thinking and thinking outside the box and creativity with all the kids, actually.
And I did borrow some of these pictures from your website. Hope you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So Reeves was an early decision to Trinity College, which is in Hartford, Connecticut. And in his third year, he studied abroad in Italy. And then when he came back from Italy, he was a changed person. I wish I could say for the better, but unfortunately, that's not the case. He had hypoglycemia, but it took a couple of years for them to diagnose him because at the time, there really wasn't a diagnosis for hypoglycemia. And that is a low blood sugar disorder. So he came back from Italy and he was just sleeping for 20 hours. He was sluggish. His
Wow.
skin was like clammy. He just couldn't function as a person. And they didn't know what was wrong with him until eventually, like you look at him and you're like, well, maybe he's on drugs and, maybe he's depressed. And that was not the case. It was, he had this thing called hypoglycemia. They finally diagnosed it and, he started to get his life back on track, but he had to quit college. He moved back in with his parents. And, by the time that was all done, he was in his mid-20s. So
Man, that must have been rough.
I think it was really hard. He came from a very high achieving family and he's a very smart kid. And so I think there was a lot of expectations that this smart guy was going to go out and, change the world. And here, this thing just completely derailed him in pivotal years of his, teen and young adult life.
Right.
So when he finally got back on track, he moved to Maine. His sister, that in that photo right there, that's his mother, Barbara. So he moved to Maine around 1978. His sister was living in Cape Nettic, so I feel like it was close enough to family, but it was still like far enough away where you were independent. She eventually moved down to Georgia, and then he was alone in the area. But at the time, he lived in a rental cabin at Jewett Court, which that's a location that no longer exists. It's right off the traffic circle in Kittery, if you're familiar with that area. And he was taking classes at a place called, or he was taking welding classes while he was working at Donnelly Manufacturing, which was in Exeter, New Hampshire. And he really enjoyed welding, I think. It was something that I think gave him some purpose, which, after going through this whole ordeal with hypoglycemia, I think is something that he needed. So in Christmas of 1982, that was the last time that his family saw him. All the kids came home to Philly to spend Christmas, and on his way back to Maine, he picked up a hitchhiker on the Verrazano Bridge in New York City named Richard. Reeves was known to pick up hitchhikers. It was just something that he did. His brother-in-law. Yeah,
definitely a different time, right?
It is. It's absolutely a different time. I think it was just so commonplace that people just didn't really think about the dangers. I mean, I think they were starting to think about the dangers, but, giving a guy a lift, taking him to his destination. So this guy named Richard, he didn't really tell him where he wanted to go. He said that he was either going to Detroit, Michigan or Ontario, which completely opposite directions and not in the way of Kittery at all. So by the time Reeves got to his exit, he just went back to his cabin with him. And Richard actually ended up living there for like 2 weeks. Reeves would give him, spare change and food and until he kind of wore out his welcome a little bit. And then one day he just left while Reeves was at work.
Now, when was it that he actually left? Do we know roughly the date?
Yeah, it was around January 7th. So this is about a month before he disappears.
Okay.
Which he did have a spare key with him. We know nothing about Richard, but I'm really not sure if, I mean, it could be like, obviously we don't really know what happened. He could have something to do with it, but I don't know. You just never know.
Has anyone ever tracked Richard down? Or we don't know Richard's last name. We don't know who he is.
We don't know anything about Richard. We just know that his name is Richard and he was picked up in New York City. And that maybe
not
he was
a lot
traveling.
to go on.
Exactly. Maybe he was traveling to Detroit, which is also a huge city. I think it would be pretty much impossible for even the best private investigator to find him.
Yeah. Here's Richard from New York. Find him.
Right. Yes. In 1983, which Richard is a very popular name.
Yeah.
Just a little bit easier than finding a Joe from New York, probably.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So
yeah.
So we're about what you said, about a month before he disappeared.
Yep.
At this point, Richard has left. What's going on in Reed's life? What was his mood at the holidays with his family? Did he mention anything to them of anything going on, or?
I mean, to what we know, everything was pretty normal. I've spoken at length with the family, and I think it just was a pretty normal interaction. I don't think that there was any worry or anything like that. He had a weekly phone call with his family on Sunday because, you really have to think back to it's a totally different time where you have your weekly check-in call and you might not talk to your family at all during the week if you don't live near them. And, that was just what they did. So he had his weekly check-in call and, the month went by, they talked to him, everything was normal. So I don't think that there was anything out of place by the time February 3rd came around.
Okay. So tell us what happened on February 3rd. He went to work. He worked his entire shift, never complained about like being sick or anything like that, right?
Nope. Just went to work just like normal. This is when we believe that he disappeared. That day, he deposited $70 into his bank account and he took out $30 in cash. By the way, this timeline is very confusing. So if it's something that like someone listening doesn't really like track, it's confusing because everything that we know about this timeline is figured out after the fact through checkbook activity, or the majority of it is. So the way that I tell it chronologically as if things happened, but a lot of this stuff wasn't discovered until 2 weeks after the fact.
Okay.
And there's a lot of activity.
Can't wait.
Yeah. So he also bought a set of guitar strings, which is interesting. We don't really know much about his guitar playing. We'd like to learn more about that, I think.
Did he own a guitar?
I would assume so.
Well, I know. Like, does his family ever talk about him playing guitar?
No. So I think it's something. I mean, they all played brass instruments in high school, and they would annoy their sister because the two brothers were like right underneath her room. And they would practice. They would practice like I think it was like the trombone and the trumpet and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that will go through some floors pretty easily.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't really know anything about the guitar, and I don't think the family did either. This time in his life, he was 31 years old. His sister, had a husband and children, and they had their lives in a different state. And his brother had his life at a different state. So I feel like at this point in time, everyone was kind of everywhere and just starting their own lives. So, it wasn't like you're in constant text message conversation. So I don't know if they really knew a lot about what Reeves was doing other than maybe what their parents told them.
So February 3rd, he bought the strings?
Yes. So that was what he did after he got out of work. He deposited the money. He got the guitar strings. And then over the next couple days, almost all of the valuable belongings in his apartment, in his rental cabin, were gone. They vanished. Anything of value.
How did we know that? Were there people checking in or like trying to find out where he was? Okay.
After he was reported missing, though, 2 weeks later.
Okay.
And there's a reason why we know that it happened sometime during this weekend. So either February 3rd through Sunday.
So this was on a Friday, then the 3rd was a Friday.
The 3rd is a Thursday.
Oh, Thursday. Okay.
Yep. So this photo is actually the last photo that was taken of him. This was taken at Christmas. So this is most likely what he looked like in February of 1983.
And how old was he here?
He was 31.
31.
Yep. So over the next few days, all the valuables were removed from his rental cabin. The only things that were left were his contact lenses, which he absolutely needed to drive, and the guitar strings and some boxes and just random useless stuff. His parents were actually out of town. They were on a trip, and he missed their weekly phone call. Like Sally, his sister, was supposed to be the one to check in. He never called, and she didn't. When she called, he never picked up. But, it's not really that big a deal. You miss one phone call, you'll just try again and see if he'll pick up another time. So she kept trying to get in touch with him, but, she wasn't able to, obviously. Over the following weeks, his bank account was drained to the point of it being overdrawn. And like I mentioned before, we know this because of his check history. His checkbook was completely spent. And then the bank was like, all right, it's time. We're closing this because you don't have any money.
So what were those checks written out for?
Yep. I will get to that further down the timeline. Yeah.
So-
Go ahead.
Real quick, Joseph asked, did
Yeah.
anyone stay at the cabin with him? So I'm not sure if you joined late, Joseph, but there was a Richard. He picked up hitchhiking from New York, allegedly going to either Detroit or going to Canada. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Ontario.
Ontario.
Random.
Yeah. So
Ended up crashing with him instead.
Yeah, but he
Richard
was only
stayed-
there for 2 weeks. Yeah, he
That
was
was
only
a
there
month
for 2
before.
weeks.
Yeah, he left a
Correct.
month before he went missing.
Yes, and Reeves did not have any roommates either. There was a sighting, I believe it was Friday night, of a man who had like a leather jacket and dark hair. The neighbor saw someone going into the cabin, but didn't think anything of it. So we don't really know much about that person either, but I don't believe it was Reeves.
All right. So go ahead.
So
Sorry.
yeah, so Reeves was very meticulous and frugal with his money. He always paid rent first. He never really spent much on personal items. He was just very much by the books and responsible. So, and he also didn't have a ton of money in his bank account. So these spendings were very strange. During the week of February 7th, Sally kept trying to call him and get in touch with him, but she couldn't at all. So that week, the purchases that were made from his checkbook, and I don't say that Reeves made the purchases, I say like the purchases that were made with his checkbook, because we don't think that that's him, even though there are sightings of people who said that they saw him, which we can touch on that later. So there was a Radio Shack purchase. There was Daymart, which Daymart was really popular, like thermal underwear line. Like they had just sponsored the Olympics. They were really high end and popular at the time, expensive too. And Shaw's grocery store. So the first do you have a question?
I was going to say, so thank you for paying attention to me.
Of course.
Usually I'm like, oh, stop.
Yeah.
So did anyone look into what those purchases were? Like, do we know what the check was written out for?
We do.
I know you said the thermal underwear, but as far as like the Shaw's, or you said Shaw's, right?
Yeah, we don't have the receipt for Shaw's. Though I'm really curious because this Shaw's was in Stratham, New Hampshire, and this isn't his normal grocery store. So he lived in Kittery, and there was just like a little local market that he would go to for groceries. He's a single guy living in a tiny cabin. He probably doesn't even have a full-size refrigerator. I don't know that for sure, but that's my guess, because these cabins were very transient. Like if we looked up the city directories to see if we could find neighbors of Reeves, and they're all just listed as transient. So my guess is that it's kind of like a little hotel room type of thing. We don't have photos from the inside, but anyway, that purchase was on the 4th. So that was Friday, the day after he disappeared, in Stratham, New Hampshire, not his normal grocery store. It is close by to Donnelly, though, which is interesting. And the purchase was made for $80, which is about $210 in today's money.
Right. That's a huge
That's
For
order.
a
a
single
lot.
guy. That's like, yeah, that's very significant. Like when we go grocery shopping, prices have gone up a lot, but 200 is usually enough to get our whole family of 4 through a week.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of money. So that's definitely curious. Wednesday the 9th, the checkbook purchased the thermal underwear from Daymart, and it was about $75. So that's also like around $200. We know the sizes of the underwear. So there was thermal underwear size small and XL. And on the website, there's a photo of, it's funny, from the catalog. We found the catalog that we think would have been in use at the time and tried to, based on the sizes and the prices, figure out exactly which one he bought, but we couldn't quite get there because they also have like women's, they have children's, they have men's, they have petite, etc.
But so the two different sizes, a small and an XL purchase.
Yes, neither of which are him.
He as you say, he looks like a medium through and through.
Yeah, I mean, he's like 5'8". He's probably going to wear a medium. So assuming these are men's sizes, it's just a really odd purchase.
Yeah.
Where did you posted that somewhere? Was that on Facebook that you posted those images? I just went to your website.
It's on the website. Yeah. So if you go to the original, not the Reeves page that's on the homepage, but that's probably the easiest link. The one on the homepage, there's a link to, I think, the full blog in there. But it's at the bottom of the full blog. Those photos are funny.
Yeah, because I did look at those earlier and I was like, what is that? I didn't know that part of the story.
They're so 80s.
Yeah.
They're so 80s. But the following day, $30 was withdrawn from his checking and $50 from his savings. So we also have like smaller amounts of cash being withdrawn. Saturday the 12th, there was a purchase at Radio Shack made for a set of speakers that cost about $50, which is $130 today, and a $30 deposit was made on a $280 car radio system, which is about $738 today. So those are really big purchases, especially if like someone, I don't know, let's say you're going to go off the grid. Like, why would you spend that much money on a car radio?
And he did have a vehicle, right? He drove a red Volkswagen. Yes.
And, you know, I don't know if that car radio system would even fit the bug. Yeah, that's those are Daymart. That's from the catalog.
Oh, thanks, Jeff. I'm sitting here like looking all over for him. Oh, yeah.
The hell of a mustache on that guy right there.
Yeah,
too.
right.
Good.
Chest hair coming up through the shirt. Yeah, very.
So
80s.
this was discovered as part of our work when we originally produced the episode. And yeah, we haven't gotten any further to pinpoint it, but that's the catalog for, I think, spring 1983.
Let's see.
So,
I was 9. I was 9 in 83.
I wasn't even born yet.
Not alive. All right.
Thank you,
you're welcome. So Reeves' family returned home from their trip and Sally let them know that she couldn't get in touch with them. So on Sunday the 13th, there was a check that was written for the balance of the Radio Shack, which something interesting about the Radio Shack, it was in South Portland, and I can't quite wrap my head around why. For a while, we were thinking that maybe it was a mistake because there was a Portsmouth location for Radio Shack. But the original, I work with the Kittery PD on this case, and the original detective notes say South Portland, and I just don't think that that would be a mistake. We don't have the receipts, we don't have the checks, but we do have his notes.
Well, and I wonder if the size of the Radio Shack in Kittery is a lot smaller than the one that would be in South Portland. They had more product, they had more to choose from.
Yeah. Another thought is maybe if someone was using his checks, that maybe someone had tried to do that before and their face would be flagged at the counter. That's another thought that I had. But I don't know why South Portland is almost an hour away from Kittery. It's an outlier. It's really odd to me.
That's actually a good point, because if he's from that area, he might, someone stole his checkbook or whatever, might think that he'd be recognizable, right? So go out of the area to purchase if you're using someone's stolen checkbook.
Yeah, I mean, all the other things were in the area, but it just makes me think that maybe it was somebody who has done this before, who has used other people's checks or passed bad checks, and now, his photo is pasted on the counter. Something like that. I mean, that's speculation, but...
Well, that makes sense too. Like, people are looking for him, right?
Yeah. So Reeves had his weekly call with his family on Sunday. He missed it 2 Sundays in a row, and now his family was back. So his dad called the Kittery Police Department and reported him missing on the 14th. So now we're a full 11 days after the 3rd. It's been over a week. On the 15th, the police do a wellness check on the cabin, and that's when they find that the cabin was completely empty. And the door was ajar, There were pipes frozen, and so they realized that it had to have been cleaned out that weekend prior because there was a giant snowstorm and there was no tracks in the snow. And that's when they found everything of value was gone. So that had to have happened sometime prior to Sunday. What would that be, like the 7th, I think? The 6th or the 7th?
Okay. Wow.
That same day, his Volkswagen Beetle was towed from an unknown location to a local Exxon station. And that was in Elwyn Park, which is right below Portsmouth. The police find out that the post office box at the Kittery post office, which is where he gets his mail stored, was last cleaned out around that time, which means that there's a final check from Donnelly waiting for him. So they call up Donnelly and they tell him, there's a missing persons report out for him. We're trying to find him. Make him come in and pick up that check in person. The last purchase that was made on this account, on his bank account, was another purchase from the Shaw's grocery store in Stratham. Again, this is not his regular place, and it's for $61 in groceries. So, it's probably like another $190 of groceries spent again within a week of each other.
Right.
It's a lot of groceries.
Yeah. For one guy.
Yeah. And at this point, his account, he didn't have the money in the account to support that. So his account was overdrawn and it was closed. And all of those checks bounced. So all of the businesses, the money was gone after the fact that
It's not like today where they'd have an answer instantly that there's no money in your account.
Right. Like, you don't have it all like monitored. Like, it has to, the checks are cashed, and, you either have the money or you don't. And then you just get pasted on the wall if you don't.
So that topic of the bad checks was, I'm assuming that they looked into like convictions of people who in the area might have had a history of writing bad checks, right? People or fraudulent activity.
At the time, I don't think so. Today, yes, we have gone back to try to see, we've gone through the records at the police department to try to find other crimes that might be similar, to see if maybe there's some recurring names popping up, stuff like that. Yeah. But back then, there really wasn't a whole lot of an investigation that was done.
So someone would just like write a bad check and they'd tell them, hey, don't come back in. Like, there wasn't really a lot of prosecutions that happened at the time, you think?
I don't think so, unless someone was like a recurring, offender, or somebody who spent, tons of money there.
Right.
Probably it was more just handled by the managers at the stores, where they're like, if you see this person, don't let them, they cannot buy a check. They have to do cash. We have tried to find.
I think they call it negotiating with a useless instrument or something nowadays, right?
Oh, really?
Or back 10 years ago when people were still writing checks. No one writes a check anymore.
Yeah, I know. Whenever I have to, I'm like, oh, really?
Joseph, I don't think there's much for cameras back then in 83 at most of these locations.
In general, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately. That would be great, because I would love to see the face of the person that was using the checks.
Okay, so they write a check out to Reeves, right? And they send it.
This is his final paycheck.
He's going to go pick it up at the post office.
Well, the police tried to get them to make him come pick it up in person. And I don't know if it was just a miscommunication, that whoever answered the phone that day believed that the person on the other end. So this is on the 21st. Someone called up and said, like, hey, it's Reeves. Like, I've talked to my family. I'm fine. You can just send my check. And I don't know if they didn't get the memo from the police, or if they were just convinced that it was him, because they released the check to the mail. Which, it's kind of a good thing that they did, because then we wouldn't have the moment at the post office. That check just would have been, it would have been gone. Somebody on the 23rd or 21st, tried to pick up his red Bug from the Exxon. And they attempted to pay by check, but the mechanic refused to take the payment, so they left. There's no description of him. I think it was just somebody who looked enough like Reeves to pass as him, which, to be honest, Reeves looks like the every white man of the 80s. So, especially with the facial hair, Like
Yeah.
everyone looked like that. So everyone who thinks that they saw Reeves, I don't know. They're not really people who knew him, who had like a relationship with him. So the car was actually a gift from his father, but that person tried to come back and sell the car to the Exxon, but they wouldn't buy it. So yeah, and then the following day, someone called up Donnelly and they ended up mailing the check. So at this point, we are almost 3 weeks after his disappearance, and there is a final check that is waiting for him at the Kittery post office. And his parents came up from Philadelphia to try to help the police, to try to look for him. This is a really small police department who really doesn't have the capacity to deal with something like this. And honestly, at the time, I don't think that anyone thought that like what we do now, looking at it with a possible suspicious lens. I think it was just like, there were a lot of cults happening. There was a lot of people going off the grid. I think it was just a case of like, well, he's just having a rough week and he'll turn around, he'll come up. So his parents got permission to stake out the post office, and they waited. They pretended to be tourists in Kittery in February at the post office. I think that's hilarious. And they just waited, hoping that Reeves would come in and get his mail. And on February 24th, this is 3 weeks later, somebody with Reeves' key came into the post office and opened his box, but it wasn't Reeves. He took the mail out. He threw everything else out except for the check from Donnelly. Barbara, the Reeves' mother, confronted him and asked where her son was. And the man said, "He's with me at an apartment in Portsmouth. If you have a car, I'll take you to him." But once they got outside, he ran away, and Barbara never saw him again. They didn't catch up with him after that because Kemp happened to be away with the car at that moment.
Oh, man.
But
and this is the picture she took, right?
yes, fortunately, because she was pretending to be a tourist, she took a photo of him. She had a camera, and it's this photo. Unfortunately, the man put his hand up right at that last minute and did an excellent job of covering his face.
Like that's the difference between solving this case and still looking at it 40 years later.
Yeah. I wish that I could like make that photo have things that it doesn't and make it HD and just pull a print off of it. But unfortunately, that's not a thing. But that'd be awesome if it was. But I look at this photo and I think of Barbara, and I think of her in this moment confronting this man who has a key to her son's mailbox and takes the check out, and then she like has this photo and she goes to develop it, because this isn't when everyone had phones where there's a camera in your pocket 24/7.
Right.
This is, you take a photo, you go get it developed. This was the only photo, and then that's the photo. It's just such a heartbreaking moment.
So it looks like he may have like reddish hair, possibly a beard, kind of longer hair, which again, a lot of guys had. I had hair in '83. So, and you can't tell what the hat says either, right? Like this wording across the front, but you can't tell what that says.
Yeah. I mean, I think that he possibly could look enough like Reeves to pass as him.
I mean, you can even sort of see like the details. I think just one picture back, like, what was the one where he was like, you can kind of see that would be passing enough with just the beard there, unfortunately.
Yeah, we don't know what the hat says. I've had every recommendation in the book. Unfortunately, though, there's a lot of brands that have red and white logos. You can think like Milwaukee, Budweiser, McDonald's, Coca-Cola.
What about Donnelly? What was their logo look like?
They didn't really have a uniform. We've spoken with people who worked at Donnelly, and because we wanted to see if maybe what he's wearing in the photo was similar to something like a uniform that people would have worn. But the woman that we spoke with said that they didn't really have uniforms. So yeah.
Kara says a Nike logo, but I'm not sure if
Yep.
Nike was that big in '83.
Yeah, I don't know, but I mean, these national brands, though, it would be awesome if there was enough to be like, oh yeah, that's a local brand, because then you could maybe like trace it back to something. But if it's like Nike or Milwaukee or Budweiser, that's a national brand. So unfortunately, it doesn't really help us narrow it down.
Yeah, the most that we can determine out of this picture is that he has 5 fingers and a beard.
Yes.
Like,
And long hair.
Yes.
yeah, longer hair. Yeah.
I wish that we could go back and ask Barbara to do a composite sketch. Like we have a description of him, but I mean, it's really not that different from the description of Reeves.
Oh, really? I was going to ask you, what did she say he looked like? And did she remember what the hat said by chance? And obviously she didn't. Yeah,
she did not. I mean, it's not listed anywhere in any of the notes that we have if she did remember it. So it's just something that we don't know. And this is kind of like the climax of the timeline. This is where it all kind of ends for the most part, is at this post office.
This point right here, this picture, this is what grabs people's attention on this case. Like it's the mom's there waiting to find her son, and then this random dude shows up to take stuff out of his post office box, puts his hand out, and you just miss his face.
Yeah. I wish that we had done a composite sketch, but unfortunately, I mean, they just weren't thinking like that back then,
Right. Yeah.
There really wasn't much of an investigation. I do think that Detective Avery did the best that he could do, but there's no information, there's no resources. There's also no obvious signs of foul play. So, there's no blood in the cabin, there's no scuffling, there's just nothing. He just completely vanished. So
the car was found, you said, an undisclosed location.
Yeah, well, an
no
unknown
one knows
location.
Why that is?
No, we would love to figure that out because unfortunately those records don't exist. Just like a lot of things in this case, the records don't exist that we want to find out where that was towed from, because if it was towed in front of, an apartment building, that could be an address that we could look into.
Right.
But we know where it was towed to. We just don't know where it was towed from.
So Detective Jeff was doing some research earlier. Are you aware that the EPA had contacted Donnelly about issues with basically waste material, like improper disposal of waste? So you're aware of that. Is there any chance that Reeves could have been involved with, like, as a whistleblower or something like that? Have you guys looked into that?
I mean, it's definitely a thought. It's something that we've thought about. We don't have any basis for that to go on. Like, we do know that there was stuff happening at Donnelly. At the time, there was a big discussion over whether to unionize or not, because Donnelly was cheap and they were not the greatest company to work with. I think that there was some shady stuff going on. And so there was a big discussion where the workers wanted to unionize so that they could get better wages. And Donnelly obviously did not want to do that because they wanted the cheapest labor possible. Right. So there was also that going on, as well as this like toxic waste scenario.
And they've shut down since, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they were bought by like Brockhouse Corporation out of the UK.
Okay.
So
yeah,
Donnelly does not exist.
I tried looking into them and I didn't find anything beyond, I think 83 was the last time I could see anything with their name on it.
Yeah.
So did his mom get to see the checks that were written? And did she verify that this is not Reeves writing it all?
Yeah, we don't have the checks. So that's not something that I can confirm. We just know where the checks were written out to and the amount. And from the original detective going to places like the Radio Shack, we know what was purchased. But unfortunately, we don't have a copy of the checks because that would have been something that was handed over to the cashier and then it went, internal somewhere to the bank, and bank records don't exist. So it's funny, we can get records for bank accounts and wages from like the 1800s, but we can't for the 80s. Like, we've tried everything.
That's weird. Joseph said something here. Waste management in the 80s was known to have shady mob ties, I think it says. They also used to dump evidence easier.
Certainly, curious. But yeah, I mean, there really wasn't a whole lot of investigating. There was no signs of foul play. So there was really only so much that they could do. And I think at this time, even like in the immediate aftermath, I don't think that the family even thought that something bad had happened. Reeves' dad wrote him a letter and sent it to the mailbox with a check in it for $50. And when they went to go close the account for it, that check was still sitting in there. That letter was unopened. So I think it took some time for them to think that like something bad happened. But at the same time, like they knew that if he were going to go off the grid, he was very philosophical. If he were going to go do something like that, he would have told his family. If he were going to die by suicide, he would have told his family.
Now, this case kind of sat quiet for almost 40 years. And then what got you involved with Reeves' case? And I meant to ask that in the very beginning, like, how did you connect to this case?
So Brian Kummer is the detective. Well, actually now he's a sergeant at Kittery PD. I'm going to have to get used to saying that. He would just kind of look at this case every month while he, had spare time. And he finally just decided to put it out there. He reached out to the family in the fall of 2021 and asked if they wanted to put it out there. And prior to this moment, there was absolutely nothing. If you searched Reeves Johnson, you couldn't find anything online for him. I don't even think he was in NamUs at that point. So he reached out to a writer at Seacoast Online, Portsmouth Herald, and they did an article on it. And I saw that article. And the first thing that intrigued me was that I didn't know his name. And I mean, I'm sure you guys are too. Like, I'm very familiar with all of the names on the main cold case list. And even ones that aren't on the cold case list that are still missing or, technically unsolved. Like, I know those names, and I saw his name and I was like, why don't I know that name?
Right.
So that was the first thing that got me. And then the second thing that got me was that photo of the man. I was just like, how does no one know about this? And ironically, that photo of the man wasn't even in the case file. So the case file was paper thin when Brian took it on. He had no photos except for I think one photo of him, and that's it. And then when he met up with the family prior to doing that article, they shared this blue box that they had, which is everything that his mother did to try to find him. So every correspondence she had, anything relating to Reeves and his estate and his disappearance is all in that box.
Wow. And
that's where that photo was living. And
that's like I said, right? Like, kind of like me. When I saw that guy with his hands up and the mom's taking the picture, like, that's what drew me into the case. It's kind of neat that you said the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my mind, I'm just like, man, people need to see this. Like, if that photo had been published in the newspaper, I feel like so many more people would have taken an interest. But there was only one article that was published in the Portsmouth Herald at the time of his disappearance. So there was nothing.
Like, they're just like that photo alone, there could have been, like, you could have had people, if you posted it the day after or whatnot, that could have been like, oh, I saw this guy, like, as he was running away. There could have been other people that maybe could have tracked down, right? Like,
or maybe it's a uniform, maybe it's someone's signature. Maybe it's Johnny's signature hat who works down at, I don't know, the car maintenance shop or something, Yeah. I do believe that man was local and people would have known him. So I saw that article. I reached out to Brian and I was just like, my name is Kristen. I have a podcast called Murder, She Told. I'm an advocate. I'd love to help you get the word out if you're interested. And to my surprise, he was like, yeah, we talked on the phone. He was like, you want to come down and see the case file? And I was like, yes.
As
of course.
Here it is, paper thin.
Yeah, I
just
mean, it was
one piece of paper, right?
there wasn't much in there. There was more in the family's case file, but just the fact that there was this open invitation, which I'd never heard before, I was like, wait a minute, what? Um,
Oh, that's awesome.
so yeah, so we originally we agreed to just, like we were gonna produce an episode. The family came up in November. We spent 2 days at the police station reviewing all the files, kind of getting all of our facts in order. Cause like I said, there's no research to be done that's not in that box, and talking to people at this point, because there's nothing out there except for one article. So we spent 2 days talking to them, learning about Reeves, interviewing them, and going through the case file. And then we released an episode in November of 2021, because my goal was like, I want to get everyone to see that photo. I want everyone to know his name, because it's so much harder almost 40 years later trying to investigate this case,
But then, so because you did the podcast on his case, you actually were able to create a buzz about the case and find something that had been missed in the case file. I'm gonna just put up here Cheryl, right?
Yeah. So slowly over time, our relationship kind of turned into a very collaborative one. So, I mean, Sergeant Comer is just incredible. He's the detective that I wish every family had. And, we have created a very special relationship with him, and we work on this case with him, which is unlike any other case that I've been involved with. So I'm always thinking of like ways to get this case out there into the media, and we've offered a $6,000 reward. We've held press conferences. I've done tons of press pushing. And behind the scenes, we are constantly making calls and just trying to like get the nitty gritty, because this case, you have to dig for all of the information. It is not out there. So something that Brian came up with for an idea was to look through the dispatch logs and look through some of those records that are in the Kittery PD to see if maybe there's similar crimes that occurred, that there might be a recurring name that we could look into, or just other things of interest. And we were looking through the dispatch logs, and on the day that his father reported him missing, there was kind of like a bolo, in a sense, sent out to all the other police departments in the area, asking if they had any information on Reeves and just to like be aware of it. And York called back and said that they had it on file that Reeves lived in York in 1981 and worked as a dishwasher at at Borderline Restaurant, which was interesting because we had only known that he worked at Donnelly Manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
So this was new information to us, and it sounds like so trivial. Like, oh, okay, so he worked as a dishwasher in 1981. Where is that going to get us? But with this case, every little piece is so important. And the way that I look at that piece of information, and I think that like all of us do on the investigating team, is that now we have another set of people that we can specifically seek out. So prior to that, we were looking for people who worked at Donnelly Manufacturing during a certain period of time, and then just like a general pool of anyone who maybe remembers him. But now I can be like, hey, did you work at Borderline Restaurant in 1981 in Kittery?
Right.
So that was the first piece of
essentially
information.
doubles the amount of people that you can like ask questions to.
Hopefully. So far, we have not spoken with anyone who worked at Borderline, but
oh darn,
still seeking that. And then there was a second time where we went back to the Kittery Police Department. This was in February of 2022, and we wanted to digitize the entire case file, because at this point we didn't have anything digital, and it had been about 1.5 years since I had seen it, and now we know what we're looking for. We know what we want. We're just more familiar with the case instead of like the first time where it was all new. So I went down with Byron, who also works on the show, and we brought down 2 scanners and went into the freezing cold records room and just started scanning. And I mean, like thousands of pages, scanning all of these documents. Some of these folders had staples that are older than me. That was the hardest part, is taking all of these little tiny rusty staples to like scan all of these pages. It took 2 days and we were completely exhausted. Brian had to go home because he had to work at like 6 o'clock in the morning. So at this point, it was midnight and it was just Byron and I. And we're pushing through. We have a almost 2.5 hour drive back home to Central Maine. And the very last thing that we pulled from the box was a letter. And it was from 1978. And it mentions a name that we had been searching for the past 1.5 years, 2 years. Reeves had a girlfriend and we didn't know her name. And it's, if you listen to the original episode, that's part of my call to action, is like, was this you? Do you remember dating a man named Reeves? But we didn't know her name. And now we do. And it's Cheryl. And that's all I know. I wish I knew her last name.
But the spelling's different than
I'll take
the typical Cheryl, right?
I think it was a popular spelling. I'm really not sure. I know a Cheryl spelt like that, so I guess in my mind I'm like, oh, it must have been like 50-50. But yeah, her name is Cheryl, and it's spelled Cheryl. And again, it seems like such a small piece of information. Like, okay, Kristen, yeah, go find a Cheryl from 1978. But it felt like kismet. It felt like the movie moment of this story where something is telling you that the information is there. You just have to keep going. You have to dig for it and you have to find it, because that name was there in the box all along. And I'd already looked at this stuff in the box, and it was something that I didn't pick up on because I didn't know I was looking for it at the time.
Well, no, especially if you're reading multiple things and it kind of gets monotonous or whatever.
Yeah.
Angie does say that maybe the Richard guy watched and learned Reeves' behaviors, left and came back to take over his identity. Just a thought. So that's a good thought, Angie.
Yeah, it's possible. We don't know anything about Richard, really. I wish I did.
Did
So
Richard
yeah,
know
those are.
Cheryl?
I mean, I don't think so. I don't know how long they dated. I only know that they were dating in 1978 at the time of this letter. At the time of his disappearance, like, I don't think it was a long-term relationship, because I think the siblings would remember her more. And they really don't. Like, they have some vague memories. There was a woman that he was dating who had a child. It's plausible that this is her. But it also might not be at the same time. But I do think that this is the same Cheryl. But that's pretty much all they really remember about Cheryl. So if you know a Cheryl, or if you are a Cheryl and you dated Reeves, let me know, because we'd love to talk to you. Cheryl's not a suspect, by the way. We really want to find somebody or people who knew him intimately.
Right. They might know information that they don't realize matters at this point.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't spoken to anyone who remembers him from his time in Maine. So there's a lot of questions that we have about what his day-to-day life was like.
Right. Flesh out his personality, his habits, his hobbies, you know, like that could open up a lot of new avenues for like,
exactly.
Where to look. Maybe his favorite place to hang out was X, Y, or Z, you know, like, and that just opens up more chances for asking questions.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's really our biggest quest right now, is to find people who remember him, who either worked at Donnelly, or I don't know, who was like, yeah, I remember Reeves would come and do an open mic night every Thursday night at XYZ bar.
It's guitar.
With his guitar, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's odd that we haven't, and I try not to go too deep in the weeds on why. I just would like to find them.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? Do you have anything planned with the Kittery PD? Are you doing anything like I know back in, I think, 2022, you guys did an event trying to gain more information about Reeves' case. And is there anything planned for the future?
Not right now. I mean, it's always kind of ongoing in the background. Yeah, we did do a big press release event, like press conference to announce the reward. Um, and that was probably like the biggest thing that we've done. We go down and we do the Kittery Block Party every year. So this will be the third year. And we take that as an opportunity to flyer, which last year it was a miserable downpour and it sucked and it was awful. So I hope that we have better weather this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're just, we just put out this information about Cheryl and about Borderline. So we're definitely seeking, people who either worked there or who know a Cheryl, like Cheryl might be living in Florida and has no idea that this case is a thing.
Right. Yeah, maybe had a couple memories of him, but never really thought of him past them separating, right?
Yeah, I mean, she might not even know that he's missing.
Exactly.
Like
right.
people move away, people, especially Maine, old people in Maine love to go to Florida.
Yeah.
So, we think that she's probably like 65 to 80, guessing if she was like in her 20s or early 30s in 1978. So, yeah.
So what is the reward at right now?
It's 6,000.
1,000. Not that that should matter, but
no, I would love to up it. Maybe if Murder She Told makes more revenue, I'll up it.
Right. Andrea is saying, do the siblings have any recollection of what Cheryl looked like back then, even though obviously she'd be different today, height, body type, hair color, eye color, etc. And I don't think that they even knew about her, right?
Well, they have a vague memory about somebody who he was dating who had a young son. Hugh has a memory about maybe he dropped Reeves off at like Route 1, at like a house on Route 1, and he thought that maybe that was her. But that's pretty much the extent of it. Although, to be fair, we haven't really gotten a chance to like sit down and dive a little bit deeper into this, which is something that I would like to do. But on the surface, because I do think that there are more memories of little things like that could come up in conversation. But on the surface, they really don't remember her at all.
And this is something that's probably been looked into, but it's a good idea. If he was a local, like his yearbooks, I'm assuming for the guy that the photo of the guy that no one knows about.
Yeah, Reeves was not local, if that's what you mean.
Mhm.
Reeves went to school in Philly.
I think they meant the person who took his last paycheck.
Oh yeah.
And again, not that would
even
necessarily narrow it down, because like you said, looks like every other white guy from the 80s.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't even know where I would start with that. Just because like you have different schools, you have different years. I don't know how old he was. I don't know if he was, 27 or 32.
Right.
And I don't know what his face looks like, unfortunately. I wish.
Right.
He probably didn't have the beard in high school, I'm assuming. So.
Well, I mean,
I don't know. I mean, he could have.
Reeve had a bit of a beard there in high school.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a picture of him when he was like 16? He looked like a full-grown man there.
Yeah. I wish it was like something where I could just open up a yearbook and it's like one of those movies where you just open it up and you just have like this hunch and you're like, that's the guy. That would be awesome.
Absolutely. So what else is going on with Murder She Told? Like, your podcast's doing great. It's always near the top. Or I know you're very what's the word I'm looking for? Humble, yes, about the rating and stuff. But I constantly see you guys like in the top 25 on Apple Podcasts, and you guys are doing fantastic work and doing a great job.
Thank you. We are just working with more families and getting more stories out there and just continuing to get better at telling stories, I think, and helping families. And also working on this case in the background too. Yeah.
Like, this is your case, right?
I would say it's my case, but I mean, I am very close to it at this point. Yeah.
What is this?
This is definitely a case that I have a lot of heart for.
Does anyone else remember REO Speedwagon besides me?
I hear them every now and then.
I mean, I do listen to classic rock, so.
Cool. Kristen, is there anything you want us to share with everyone? If you haven't listened to Kristen's podcast, Murder She Told, you do fantastic work, a lot of investigation, research. It's always a good story. If you're like true crime, please subscribe to Murder She Told podcast.
And I put the link to our website in the chat for everyone to go to as well. Go check it out. It's really great stuff.
Yeah, there's lots of. I was just gonna say there's a lot of really cool photos on the website for this case and also other cases as well.
Yeah, you do a great job with that. Like we try to do that with families, get photos of things other than what you see online constantly, right? Because like on Reeves case, well, you even said earlier, there's very little online before you even started this. But then even what you see online is less than what you see at your website. Like it's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I'm such a photo person. I love photos. I especially love like vintage type of candids and photos from back then, and seeing photos, especially of like the families that we work with, because I just feel like they tell such a story. So photos are very special to me. If you look at the Instagram, it's full of just like, I don't know, interesting candids from families that have shared them.
Very cool. Have you used that app where it like puts the photo to motion?
No, I haven't. I always thought they looked a little creepy.
It does look weird, right? But I know Kim Moreau family, I had sent that to them and they loved it. But other people might, be shocked by it or whatever. But it's kind of
I think it depends.
Yeah, there is. All right, so Joseph said, "Thank you, Kristen."
Thank you.
Andrea said, "Definitely looking into her link." Thank you.
Yeah,
and I'll go check her out for sure.
Thank you. And if anyone has any questions about the case or thoughts, you can always email me at hello@murdershetold or reach out on any social media platform. I'm on all the platforms. Even if it's something that we've already thought about or we've already looked into, I love hearing from people being like, wait, do you think that hat could be this? Or have you thought of this? Because it just makes me feel like people are listening and that they've like this case is stuck with them enough that they're thinking about it in their spare time. So it always means a lot to me.
Kara says, "Love you, Kristen. You're an angel to true crime. You covered my best friend's story, Mark Dugas. As I mentioned to you earlier, you do such a great job telling stories."
Thank you, Kara.
And I did just want to put this out here that if anyone listening or try to share this out so that other people hear this story. But if anyone hears or knows anything about any of this, you can get a hold of Sergeant Brian Cummer at 207-439-1638.
Definitely want to post when Joseph says, "Yes, thank you, Travis and Jess," as well.
I'm Jess. Hey,
you're Jess now.
We've been friends our entire life, and I'm Jess now. Come on, so Joe. Funny.
But
yeah, right. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Kristen, very much for joining us. This has been awesome.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad that we got to do this.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you have any updates, let us know, and we'll share it out as well. Or if you have any more. Anything you want to share out, we'll definitely put that out for you. Absolutely.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kristen.
Yes. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You all have a great night.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.